Did you feel threatened by the police officers?
Yes.
Did you feel threatened by Mr. Chauvin?
Yes. I have a black father. I have a black brother. I have black friends. And I look at that and I look at how that could have been one of them. It's been nights. I stayed up apologizing and apologizing to George Floyd for not doing more and not physically interacting and not saving his life. But it's like, it's not what I should have done. It's what he should have done.
What's the point of doing chest compressions?
Pumping the blood for somebody that's not doing that themselves, trying to get a pulse back.
And were you able to do that, any of those steps?
No, sir.
Why weren't you able to do any of that?
Because the officers didn't let me in to the scene.
When you couldn't do that, how did that make you feel?
Totally distressed.
Were you frustrated?
Yes.
I think you made some reference about why you videotaped, because our memories are fallible, right? And again, a stressful situation can impact your memory, right?
Absolutely. That's why we're lucky it was videotaped.
Right. Would you describe other people's demeanors as upset or angry?
I don't know if you've seen anybody be killed, but it's upsetting.
I'm going to just ask you to answer my questions as I ask them to you, okay? Did you describe Mr. Floyd as a small, slim man?
Overruled.
Yeah, it appeared to, with 3 grown men on top of somebody, it appeared that he was small and frail.
Okay.
But I know that not to be
there's
true,
no
obviously.
question.
Your job is to answer that.
I was finishing my answer.
I will determine when your answer is done.
Okay, well,
And so, do not argue with the court. Do not argue with counsel. Answer the questions. Do not volunteer information that is not requested.
And you describe, and again for the record, this is 7:45:10. Describe for the jurors what you were doing there.
I was holding up the $20 bill that I just received.
And is that something you always do, or something about this?
No, when I saw the bill, I noticed that it had a blue pigment to it, kind of how a $100 bill will have, and I found that odd, so I assumed that it was fake.
What was going through your mind during that time period?
Disbelief and guilt.
Okay. Why guilt?
If I would have just not taken the bill, this could have been avoided.
Oh my
Just take your time. Let us know when you're ready.
We'll just give you a moment, Mr. McDonald. I'm not sure if there's water for you as well. Oh, if you need a break to get some water, let me know, and we can take a break. I know that this is difficult. Can you just explain sort of what you're feeling in this moment?
I feel helpless.
What did I observe when I arrived on scene? There was a police squad, an individual laying down, 3 officers on the individual. There was multiple people. There was multiple cell phones out. There was elevated tones used. It didn't feel like a welcoming environment.
What did his condition appear to be to you overall?
In lay terms, I thought he was dead.
So, officers in the back doing chest compressions, you're getting set up, correct?
Yes, sir.
You went to the second location so that your partner could get back in the back with you to take over for the officer, right?
Not to take over. We needed everybody we could at that time.
Why didn't you just have the officer help you continue so you could go straight to the hospital?
That's not what we do.
Is it because he's not an EMT?
Any layperson can do chest compressions. There's no reason Minneapolis couldn't have started chest compressions.
That's not my question. My question is, he's not an EMT, correct?
I don't know the level of certification of the individual that got into the back of my rig.
All right. You wanted a partner who could help you out, correct?
I wanted as many people that were willing to help me at that time to work this cardiac arrest.
And is the placement of a knee on a subject's neck a use of force?
Yes.
A reportable type of force?
Not necessarily.
Okay. And why is that?
For handcuffing somebody in a prone position or fighting with someone, it could happen where your knee ends up on their neck.
Okay. For about how long?
I guess whatever's reasonable.
Okay. And which would be when?
Until you get control of the party, I guess.
Control is in the person is then handcuffed?
Handcuffed and not continuing to fight with you anymore.
Okay. So once the subject is handcuffed and no longer resisting?
Yes.
At that point, the restraint should stop.
Yeah. When Mr. Floyd was no longer offering up any resistance to the officers, they could have ended the restraint.
And that was after he was handcuffed and on the ground and no longer resisting?
Correct.
Have you ever, in all the years you've been working for the Minneapolis Police Department, been trained to kneel on the neck of someone who is handcuffed behind their back in a prone position?
No, I haven't.
Is that, if that were done, would that be considered force?
Absolutely.
What level of force might that be?
That would be the top tier, the deadly force.
Why?
Because of the fact that if your knee is on a person's neck, that can kill him.
What is your, your view of that use of force during that time period?
Totally unnecessary.
What do you mean?
Well, first of all, pulling him down to the ground, face down, and putting your knee on the neck for that amount of time is just uncalled for. I saw no reason why the officers felt they were in danger, if that's what they felt. And that's what they would have to feel to be able to use that kind of force.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.
So ultimately, did you respond to the area of Cup Foods or 30th in Chicago?
Yes.
And what did you do when you arrived there?
The rig stopped. My partner and I got off the rig and we looked around for a patient.
And when you got there, what did you see?
There were several police squads, one Park Police, I believe, and two or three Minneapolis police cars that I remember parked in the vicinity in the area. A couple officers were standing on the street, and a handful of people were outside.
Was there an ambulance there at the time that you were there?
No, ma'am.
And were you able to identify a patient upon arrival?
No, ma'am, there was no one on the street.
So what did you do next?
I basically went clockwise around our rig. I spoke briefly with one police officer, and then we went into the store.
And did you come into contact with anybody in the store?
Yes, ma'am.
And what was the nature of that? What happened in the store?
Could you be more specific, please?
Sure. Well, upon entering the store, did you interact with anybody who was in the area, who had been in the area?
Yeah, yes, ma'am. We spoke, as I said, I spoke to one police officer as I descended the rig, came around through a crowd of maybe 6 or 7 people who were at the mouth of the store and in the kind of the vestibule or entryway, and then I went into the store still looking for a patient.
Okay, so you went into the store looking for a patient. Did you have any interaction with anybody? You said there were a number of people, 6 or 7 people. Did you have an interaction with any of those people?
Ma'am, do you mean did I speak with any? I'm not sure what you mean by interaction.
Yes. Did you have a conversation with any of those people?
As I was walking through, I heard what people were saying, and then, but I was pretty much looking for a patient. I might have spoken to someone who was working there briefly. And while I was looking around for a patient, essentially on the ground, I did encounter an off-duty firefighter, and then I briefly spoke with one of the police officers who was at the back of the store.
Okay, so let's just talk about those 2 things. So you interacted both with an off-duty firefighter and also a law enforcement officer who was present. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
So let's first start with your objective. You said you were looking on the floor for a patient. Was it your primary goal to find a patient?
Yes, ma'am.
And when you were not able to see one easily and entered into the store, what did you do at that point? Was that when you talked to the law enforcement officer?
I made my way back toward the back of the store looking for a patient, or the call was confusing because we did not have a lot of information. So I did not have a patient description. I did not have anything else. And so I was essentially, yes, looking on the floor for someone. And at that point, though, the crowd that through which I walked was people were upset, and I was getting the sense from them that there was an injured person, and that's all so I was looking for someone on the ground.
Okay. Did you find an injured person on the ground?
No, ma'am.
So what did you do next?
My partner mostly stayed and spoke with the off-duty firefighter, who was agitated to distraught. I'm not somewhere between there. She was fairly upset. And as my job as supervisor is to kind of cut through a lot of the extraneous information and find what we actually need to deal with. And so I moved to the back, and I did see the police officer at the back of the store, which would have been the southeast corner of the building, talking to one of the employees behind the barricade, and then I approached him.
Okay. And then were you directed to another location?
Right as I was asking him what was going on, he said, I believe he said the medics left, they need you. And right about simultaneously over his radio and over ours, because we have separate dispatchers, we both had the information that the paramedics needed us at a different location.
Okay. And then you also mentioned an off-duty firefighter. Do you know who that off-duty firefighter was?
Do I know who she is now?
Her name, yes.
Yes, ma'am. Genevieve Hansen.
At the time, did you have limited interaction with her?
I had worked, I'm sorry, if you're asking prior to that day?
Right, when you arrived on scene, did you immediately recognize her as somebody that you knew?
No, ma'am. I think I walked right past her, and then she popped up to my left once we were inside the store.
Okay, and then after the fact, do you now know that that was an individual that you know to work with as Genevieve Hansen?
Prior to that, once we started speaking, I did a double take, and I clocked that I knew her.
Okay.
And then we spoke.
And what information did you have at that point in terms of what was happening and what was going on?
The police officer said that the medics had left and they needed us, code 3. Dispatch said the same thing, and then from the off-duty firefighter and from the crowd, I was hearing and inferring that there was an injured man who had been sustained injuries in a scuffle with the police, or in a situation with the police.
Okay. I'm going to put up on the screen what's already been admitted as Exhibit 68. Can we put that up, please? Oh, here we go. All right. So you described your arrival. Could you just describe what's shown in Exhibit 68, please?
Yes, ma'am. That is our fire truck, engine 17. That is me stepping out from the captain's side. We are facing eastbound on 38th Street. Cup Foods is behind us. There is a squad to my forward and right from this photo to my left, and I believe that was the police officer I spoke to, whose body camera that was. So I was about to make contact with him.
So does this show you upon your initial arrival at the scene?
Yes, ma'am.
And if we could move to Exhibit 69, please. Did someone come off? So Exhibit 69 is now on the screen. If you could just describe who is pictured in this photo.
That is me to the right of the screen, and that is firefighter Jennifer Hall to the left, coming around from her side of the rig. She was a rookie who started with us at the end of March.
And so were you both responding together, essentially?
Yes, ma'am. She was my partner.
Okay. Can we move to Exhibit 70, please? You described walking into the store and seeing some other individuals. Could you just describe what's shown in Exhibit 70, please?
Yes, ma'am. There's looks like a police squad ahead to my left, north on the street. I believe that might be a park police squad to my left. 4 people outside, one of whom is off-duty firefighter Hansen. I did not recognize her walking through.
Do you recognize her now?
Affirmative.
Could you just, you can use as a stylus or your finger, but it's a touchscreen. If you could just indicate where she is, please, in this photo. All right, you made a green mark above where, indicating Genevieve Hansen is. Can you just indicate where you are in this photo as well? All right, and there's an arrow showing where you've just made that mark. And then could you identify Jennifer Hall as well, please? All right, did you know any of the other individuals in this?
In this photo, no, ma'am.
And if we could move to Exhibit 71, please. I'm sorry, 72, please. All right, so did you ultimately enter the store and have a brief interaction as you described with a law enforcement officer in there?
Yes, ma'am.
And does Exhibit 72 show that? Maybe I should be more clear. What does Exhibit 72 show?
I believe it would be the body camera of the officer with whom we were speaking.
And who's pictured in this image?
I'm on center. I'm in the center, and firefighter Hall is to the right.
And was this inside Cup Foods?
Yes, ma'am, towards the back of the store.
All right. And as you described, when you learned that there was no patient there, we'll go back to Exhibit 71, please. Now I've got Exhibit 71 on the screen. Did you then exit the store?
Yes, ma'am.
And can you just describe, is that what you were doing in Exhibit 71 here?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So once you had the additional information, we can take that down. Thank you. What did you do next, and where did you go?
We were directed to meet the medics at 36 and Park Avenue South. We got back on our fire truck, and we responded to 36 and Park.
And what did you see when you got there?
The Hennepin County Medical Center ambulance was parked on the east side of the street, just south of 36.
And I'm going to put up Exhibit 74, which has already been admitted. Ultimately, can you just describe what point of view this is showing in Exhibit 74?
Yes, ma'am. That is not me, but this would be the view from my seat.
And so in the foreground, is that the fire truck that you were in?
I'm sorry, yes. This photo is taken from the front seat of the fire truck facing the ambulance.
And is that where your fire rig parked once you arrived at that location to meet up with the ambulance?
Yes, ma'am.
And what did you do once you arrived at that location?
Again, my partner, firefighter Hall, and I got out of the fire truck and we went into the ambulance entering from the side door.
And what did you observe at that point in time?
2 paramedics and 1 police officer and a patient on the stretcher.
What appeared to be the condition of the patient that you observed?
He was face up on the stretcher. He had an airway an advanced airway, so he had a breathing tube going into his throat, and he had the Lucas compression device, which is a CPR, kind of a pneumatic CPR device, in place and working.
And when you say working, what does that mean?
It was pumping up and down to pump his chest, pump his heart.
Okay. And first of all, this patient, was he later identified by name?
Yes, ma'am. It's George Floyd.
So you said that he had an airway in place and the Lucas machine was pumping. What did you observe about his overall condition?
I mean, other than that, he was unresponsive.
Right. What, I mean, maybe not other than that, but what do you mean by unresponsive? What did you see?
A person who is not, who's, I'm sorry, it's a confusing question. I'm sorry.
Not a good question. I apologize. Just tell.
He was an unresponsive body on a cot. The airway was in place so that we could breathe for him, or so the responders could, or people could breathe for him, and the Lucas device was compressing his heart to get blood going through his body.
And when you say breathe for him, what does that mean?
I was not clear about that. And an airway device goes in through the throat, gets better access into the lungs for some sort of airway and oxygen delivery device. In our case, would be a bag valve mask, a BVM, which is like a Nerf football sized compressible bag that we squeeze every 6 seconds to bring air into their lungs, and it's oxygenated air.
So when you say breathe for him, does that imply using that BVM and actually squeezing it?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
So, I'm sorry, to your question, in the absence of those actions, the patient would have been pulseless and unresponsive, not breathing, and for all intents and purposes, dead.
Joining me now, NBC News correspondent Shaquille Brewster, who is in Minneapolis. Also with me, University of Alabama law professor Joyce Vance and former senior FBI official and former U.S. Attorney Chuck Rosenberg. Great to have all three of you with us on the second day of the trial. Joyce, I'll start with you. You described Donald Williams today as a devastating witness for the prosecution. Explain that to us, and what about that back and forth over the type of chokehold from the defense, the significance of that, if you see any?
Well, this is the prosecution's case, so of course you'd expect the witnesses to be good. But Mr. Williams was particularly effective, and on cross-examination, he did, I think, a great job of swatting away defense efforts to paint him as an agitated, angry black man, or as someone who was going beyond his expertise, sort of a weird little exchange that they had there, since he's not really formally qualified as an expert. Williams talked about what he saw, how it made him feel, and ultimately the fact that he was forced to call the cops on the cops because of his concerns. There's a subtle point, I think, there, which is that any effort to argue that Williams was anti-police will ultimately fail, because what he did when he saw something happening that was wrong was he called the police. But he was concerned about this one police officer who he viewed as a criminal. Just devastating testimony for the prosecution to obtain.
Yeah, Joyce, this is the second day in a row where you had somebody see what was playing out and express concern. You had Williams today. Yesterday, you had that 911 dispatcher who called the sergeant to say, look, the video feed that is coming from that area is troubling. I don't see any movement there. These back-to-back narratives that something early on was troubling just adds more to the prosecution case, does it not? That people who were observing this were noticing a troubling pattern here.
It does, and Mr. Williams' demeanor is important. You know, he was so persistent but almost polite early on, trying to get the officer's attention. He gets more agitated, but he never really rolls over into anger. And all of the jurors are sitting there asking themselves, how would they have asked in his situation? He seems to have struck really the right balance. It's, I think, incredible in the circumstances that he continues, knowing that the police, you know, who are engaging in conduct that he's watching could certainly turn upon him. But he continues to ask for them to do something based on his training. That's really important evidence for a jury to see, because they can put themselves in Mr. Williams' shoes and they'll see his credibility.
And of course, Shaq, we heard earlier today from that first underage witness, Darnella. We're not going to use her last name to help protect her identity. She taped that scene on her phone that the world has now seen, the knee on George Floyd's neck. She had some emotional testimony about what she saw today that the rest of the world also saw.
Really emotional testimony. And, you know, these two witnesses are really two key bystanders, because Darnella was the one who recorded it, and Mr. Williams, he was one of the more vocal people on that scene. And when we look at what the jury has been seeing and how they've been reacting, we know that with Mr. Williams, they were connecting with him yesterday. He would turn and make eye contact with them. As far as the reaction to Darnella, well, it was after this moment that they really dialed in.
When I look at George Floyd, I look at my dad, I look at my brothers, I look at my cousins, my uncles, because they are all black. I have a black father, I have a black brother, I have black friends. And I look at that and I look at how that could have been one of them. It's been nights. I stayed up apologizing and apologizing to George Floyd for not doing more and not physically interacting and not saving his life. But it's like, it's not what I should have done. It's what he should have done.
According to the two reporters allowed in the room, they say that during that part, all of the jurors seemed very sympathetic at the end of Darnella's testimony. There's been one juror in particular that has been a little bit more expressive, sometimes showing emotion behind her, even through her mask, I should say. And that was definitely a moment that stuck out with them. You get the sense the jury is really paying attention to this very emotional testimony.
A very powerful moment for anyone that was just listening to that. I can't imagine what it was like to see it as well. Chuck, we've heard from powerful testimony from the 911 dispatcher yesterday that I alluded to earlier. 3 other compelling witnesses today. Let's talk about the defense strategy so far. What do you make of the defense team trying to push back on 2 of them?
Well, I'll tell you, Eamon, having tried lots of cases and made my share of mistakes, I saw a big one from the defense counsel. Cross-examinations are hard. Good cross-examinations are very hard. And Mr. Chauvin's attorney went too far. He did what we call opening the door to something that really hurt him. That tape you just played of Darnella speaking about how she is haunted by her failure to do more to help protect Mr. Floyd is an example of the defense attorney opening the door and inviting that redirect examination that was so emotional and so compelling. What did the defense attorney do wrong? He asked Darnella on cross-examination whether the fact that she took a video of the incident and the fact that it went viral, whether that changed her life. That permitted the prosecutor to get back up on redirect, a second shot at something that would not have been relevant or admissible earlier, and say to her, okay, you were just asked about how your life has changed. How has your life changed? And that led to the clip you just played, Eamon. So it was a mistake by the defense attorney to open the door and to permit that redirect by the prosecution that led to that very compelling testimony by Darnella. She is haunted by the fact that she didn't do more. She's not at fault. She didn't do anything wrong. She thinks she did. And I can tell you that will resonate with the jury.
Yeah, I was going to say anyone who might think that she benefited from that is sadly mistaken when you hear how much emotion she has had to endure as a result of it. Joyce, one of the other testimonies that we heard today, a witness 9 years old. This is obviously a very delicate balance for the prosecution to put someone that young on the stand. Walk us through the thinking. What's the purpose of putting someone that is 9 years old on this stand? What do you make of that witness?
It's always difficult to decide whether you put a young child on the witness stand. But in this case, it looks like it was a good call. It is, I think, very painful for us as lawyers to see a 9-year-old child process this. It is likely that she, at some point, felt strongly about testifying and being able to share her side of the story. And she's a very accurate eyewitness. She testifies to the fact that when the ambulance arrives, they actually have to remove Officer Chauvin from George Floyd. And it provides a compelling look. You know, children, when they see these situations, they testify very directly about what they observe without some of the filters that adults can employ. So they can be very direct witnesses. It was a good morning for the prosecution, Eamon, but I used to always tell my lawyers the prosecution has to convince every juror. They have to get unanimous agreement among the jury to convict. So even with a good morning like this, you can't get too far ahead of yourself as prosecutions.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And to that point, Shaq, let's talk about the jurors for a moment, because obviously we don't get to see them. We don't get to see their reactions. There are observers in that courtroom, including some of the pool reporters. What are you hearing from the reporters inside the courtroom that we're not seeing on TV? Not just about the jurors, but the general atmospherics of how today played out.
Right. And just to recap, I mean, we use that term pool reporters. This is a rotating group of reporters. 2 of them are allowed in the courtroom at a time. It rotates between different networks and different newspapers. And those are the accounts that we're relying on for this. So pardon me as I read a couple of the notes right now. I mentioned how they reacted to Darnella's testimony and how impacted they were, and how one reporter said there were many noticeable expressions of sympathy when she talked about apologizing to Floyd for not doing more. Just generally, though, what we've been seeing is that they've been taking notes. They've been engaged. They've been looking at the video. They've been apparently the chairs have wheels on them, so sometimes they swivel back and forth as different witnesses are answering questions from the prosecution. You also get a sense that during those sidebars, when the judge puts on the headset and when the attorneys are conferring with the judge privately, that they're actually talking to one another, that there's some level of familiarity, as one of the pool reporters expresses there. So there's some camaraderie or some level of comfort that they're building with one another during those moments when there is no testimony and there's that uncertainty. I know it's a little bit awkward when we watch the testimony sometimes and there's that silence there. So that's what's going on inside the courtroom. I know yesterday, for example, we saw once it got to the afternoon session, we got reports that some jurors were bringing in coffee or cups of that appeared to be coffee. No one examined what was in them, but cups of coffee cups that they came and put on their desks. So that's kind of what you're getting as this jury is paying attention. Of course, they are the focus of this trial. That is who the prosecution, the defense, and even some of the witnesses, as we saw, are focused on as this trial continues. Amen.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.
Darnella Frazier, her testimony was some of the most moving testimony. The kids, the underage people who testified were really moving. Here's Darnella Frazier, who actually shot that now infamous video, the 8-minute and 46-second video, which we now know was like 9 minutes and 20 seconds. Here she is taking questioning about whether or not George Floyd was offered care.
So as you were observing Mr. Floyd under the knee of Mr. Chauvin, did you ever see Mr. Chauvin do anything to offer care to Mr. Floyd?
No.
Did he ever either let up or get up so that he could breathe?
No.
Did you ever see him try to administer CPR?
No.
Did you see him call anyone else to administer aid to Mr. Floyd?
No.
Katie, we talked yesterday about the sort of most dangerous thing for the defense here is that after there was no pulse and after Chauvin was told there was no pulse, he still stayed on top of George Floyd and continued to constrict his breathing. That testimony, what do you make of what you heard today?
Well, it ties in to what we heard in the opening statement from the prosecution, the idea that a police officer has a duty to protect, but also to show compassion. As you'll recall during the opening statement, by the prosecution, we heard the mission statement of the Minnesota Police Department that includes the idea of having this duty to care for the citizens. But you know what's important from a legal perspective, Joy, is that there's a third-degree murder charge that got reinstated. And that has a lower standard of proof than the second-degree unintentional murder and the second-degree manslaughter charges that Derek Chauvin is facing. To prove the third-degree murder, all the state has to prove is that Derek Chauvin caused the death of George Floyd through an act that is imminently dangerous to others. So what did we hear today? We heard lay people, eyewitnesses saying it was dangerous. He couldn't breathe. He didn't get off of him. He didn't give him help. And then we had firefighter EMT Genevieve Hansen saying in her professional opinion, it was dangerous. He didn't get off of him. We heard two different people today say that they called the cops on the cops. And George Floyd may not have been able to testify on his behalf because he is gone. But we heard his voice today through the videos, which was eminently powerful. And we also heard it through the voices of those kids that testified, and it was so compelling.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's play Genevieve Hansen, because I thought her testimony was really good, too. She got into a little mix-up with the judge at the end, but she was quite good. And this is Genevieve Hansen testifying today.
Do you think it would make your job fighting the fire harder if someone started yelling at you and telling you that you were doing it wrong?
I'm very confident in the training that I've been given, so I would not be concerned about somebody that was not trained to the extent I have been.
What if they started calling you names?
Like I said, I know my job, and I would be confident in doing my job, and there's nothing anybody could say that would distract me.
Mark, this struck me as one of the weirdest defenses here, that the people standing there were distracting the officers from providing care to Mr. Floyd. They didn't show any. There were 3 officers holding down George Floyd. There was only 1 officer trying to control the scene, Officer Tao. So if they were so concerned about the crowd, why was it 3-1 on Mr. Floyd and not 3-1 on the crowd? Now, that to me didn't make sense. Did it make sense to you?
Didn't make sense to me at all. But it's a defense, just throwing everything up against the wall, seeing what sticks. What it did display was that not only didn't the police officers live up to their duty to care for Mr. Floyd, they rejected the offer of assistance by a person who claims to be a professional healthcare person. So they are just tripling down on their negligence in this particular case, and it will really come out later on about their liability in regards to the death of Mr. Floyd. It's clear. As both sides have said, primarily the prosecutors have said, the video speaks for itself.
You know, and Katie, you know, it is very difficult to, I will say again, it is really hard to convict police officers, even when it seems like obvious that what they've done is wrong. We just had a case just this week where officers were acquitted for beating up another officer who was undercover. He was covering and videotaping at a protest, at a Black Lives Matter protest. The other officers beat him to the point where he needed surgery, and they still didn't get convicted. So it's very hard. But from what you saw today, I've never seen a case like this with this much compelling evidence from young people, from a firefighter, a professional, that was so damning. I've never seen anything like it. To you, does this seem like a sort of separate sui generis case against Mr. Chauvin?
Well, listen, we have to strap in for a long ride. This is just day 2. There's going to be a lot more witnesses. And the reason why we heard the defense focus on the crowd collectively is because they could not go after the individual witnesses today. They were minors. They were women. They were breaking down. I mean, you couldn't do that. So what you do is you go after the collective crowd. But remember, in the opening statements for Chauvin's defense, they said, let's not make an emotional decision. right? Let's not make it an emotional decision. Let's listen to the actual evidence. And what they're going to say is they're going to wait for their day in the sun, which is going to be the medical testimony, the expert testimony from that, and the no excessive use of force. They're going to try to tell the jury, which they've already done, we need you to make a decision based on common sense, logic, and reason. That's the only thing they can do, because it is inescapable. The emotional component today was harsh. It was really hard. It was brutal to have to sit through and hear it and listen to it.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.